She buried her mate 6 feet below. She watched the coffin disappear. She signed the papers. She learned how to live with the quiet. 5 years later, at 30,000 feet above the ground, he took the seat beside her. The cabin lights were dimmed, the engines humming like a distant storm. She wasn't looking for him. She was looking for sleep, for silence, for a few hours where the past couldn't follow her down the aisle of a commercial flight. Her headphones were in. Her eyes were closed. Then someone sat down. The scent hit first. Not unfamiliar, impossible. Her breath caught as she opened her eyes. The man beside her had the same hands. The same scar near his jaw. The same presence that used to pull her close in the dark. Only he was supposed to be dead. Declared gone. Buried. Mourning completed. Across the narrow armrest, his jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward her, and something ancient woke behind them. At 30,000 feet, with nowhere to run and no way to explain the impossible, the past had found her. And it was breathing. Before we go any further, let's do a quick pack check. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? And tell me honestly in the comments. If you saw someone you buried sitting beside you on a flight, would you confront them, or stay silent? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with the pack. More stories are coming. Dorothy didn't visit graves anymore. She'd done it once, the day they lowered the casket into the ground. She'd stood there in black she didn't own until that week, watching strangers she'd never met shake their heads and murmur about tragedy. About loss. About a good man gone too soon. She didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because her body had already emptied itself the week before, when 2 officers showed up at her door with rehearsed sympathy and paperwork that turned a person into a problem to be filed away. Accident during remote travel. Body unrecoverable. Closed casket recommended. She'd signed everything they put in front of her. 5 years later, she didn't think about him every day. Most weeks, she didn't think about him at all. Grief had a shelf life, and hers had expired somewhere between the 2nd anniversary and the promotion she didn't celebrate. She had a routine now. Coffee at 6. Emails by 7. Gym 3 times a week, though she never pushed hard enough to feel anything. Dinner was whatever didn't require thought. Sleep came in pieces. It wasn't happiness. But it was function, and function was enough. The reassignment email arrived on a Tuesday. Effective immediately. Denver office. Temporary placement, duration TBD. No explanation. No ask for her input. Just a flight confirmation and a company card for expenses. She didn't argue. Arguing required energy she didn't have, and besides, what did it matter? Denver, Seattle, Houston. They were all just places that weren't here. She booked the same airline without thinking about it. She didn't remember it was the one they used to fly together until she was already at the gate, boarding pass in hand, staring at the departure screen. Flight 2447. Non-stop service. The same route. The same carrier. Dorothy stood there for 3 full seconds, feeling something flicker in her chest. Something like memory, or maybe just indigestion. Then she turned off her phone, slung her bag over her shoulder, and got in line. The past didn't live in airports. It lived in photo albums she didn't open and voicemails she'd never deleted but never played back. It lived in the closet where his jacket still hung because she'd never found a reason to move it. It didn't live at 30,000 feet. She walked down the jetway without looking back. The flight attendant smiled at her as she stepped onto the plane. Dorothy smiled back, the kind of smile that took no effort because it meant nothing. She found her row, stowed her bag, and slid into the window seat. Headphones in. Eyes closed. The hum of other passengers boarding was white noise. She didn't look up when someone took the middle seat 2 rows ahead. Didn't notice when the overhead bins slammed shut. Didn't care when the captain's voice crackled through the intercom with the same speech every captain gave. She was already half asleep when someone sat down beside her. The scent hit first. Cedar and rain and something darker underneath. Something that made her sternum tighten before her brain caught up. Her eyes opened. The man beside her wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight ahead, hands folded in his lap, jaw set like he was bracing for impact. She knew those hands. She knew that scar near his jawline. She knew the exact way his shoulders tensed when he was holding something back. Dorothy's breath caught. And Rowan Riker, 5 years dead, buried and mourned, didn't move. Dorothy didn't scream. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't do anything except stare at the side of a face she'd memorized in another lifetime. The plane was still boarding. A woman dragged a suitcase down the aisle. A child whined 3 rows back. The flight attendant announced something about overhead space in a voice designed not to be heard. Normal. Everything was aggressively, impossibly normal. Except the dead man sitting in 12B. Her headphones were still in, but she couldn't hear the music anymore. Just the rush of her own pulse, loud and unsteady, like her body was trying to warn her about something her mind refused to process. Grief does this, she thought. Finds faces in crowds. Builds ghosts from bone structure and bad lighting. But ghosts didn't have scars in the exact place where Rowan had split his jaw open on a hiking trip 2 months before he died. Ghosts didn't sit with their hands folded left over right, thumb pressed against their knuckle like they were counting seconds. She knew those hands. The heat started low in her chest, unfamiliar and invasive, like something waking up after years of sleep. It spread up her throat, into her temples, behind her eyes. She hadn't felt this in 5 years. Not since the funeral. Dorothy pulled one earbud out. Slowly. The way you'd move near something wild. He didn't turn. But his jaw tightened. Just barely. A muscle jumped beneath the scar. "You're in my seat," she said. Her voice came out steady. Flat. A lie she didn't believe, designed to make him prove her wrong. For 3 seconds, he didn't respond. Then he turned his head, not toward her, but toward the aisle, like he was looking for an exit that didn't exist. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." The same voice. The same cadence, low and deliberate, like every word cost him something. Dorothy's stomach dropped. She should say his name. She should grab his arm, demand he look at her, force him to explain how a man buried in a closed casket was breathing 2 inches away. Instead, she sat frozen, staring at the curve of his ear, the line of his neck, the way his chest rose and fell in rhythm she used to know by heart. "Look at me," she said. It wasn't a request. Rowan went still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from control. From a choice being made in real time. He turned. And Dorothy stopped breathing. It was him. Older. Sharper in the edges. Hair slightly longer, though still dark. Eyes the same shade of gray she used to think looked like overcast mornings. But it was him. He didn't say anything. Didn't apologize, didn't explain. Just looked at her like he was waiting for her to decide what happened next. The heat in her chest spiked, sudden and vicious. Not warmth. Not comfort. Recognition. Her body knew before her brain could justify it. Knew the pull, the ache, the way her ribs seemed to tighten and loosen all at once, like something inside her had been dormant and just woke up furious. "You died," Dorothy whispered. Rowan's throat worked. "Once. Twice." "I know," he said. "Not I'm sorry. Not I can explain. Just, I know." Somewhere behind them, the flight attendant was doing a safety demonstration. Seatbelts. Oxygen masks. Nearest exits. Dorothy couldn't hear any of it. She was too busy trying not to fall apart at 30,000 feet. The plane began to taxi. Dorothy turned toward the window, away from him, because looking at Rowan made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't see the bottom of. Her reflection stared back at her in the darkened glass, pale, controlled, eyes too wide. She forced her breathing to even out. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The way her therapist taught her 3 years ago when panic attacks became routine. He's not real. Trauma does this. Builds delusions. You're tired. Overworked. This is a breakdown, not a reunion. But her chest still burned. That pull, the one she'd thought died with him, was awake now. Insistent. Like a hook lodged beneath her sternum, tugging her toward him even as she pressed her shoulder against the wall of the plane. She heard him shift beside her, the fabric of his sleeve brushing against the armrest. "Dorothy. Don't." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She didn't look at him. The engines roared. The plane tilted as they turned onto the runway. She gripped the armrest, knuckles white, and kept her eyes locked on the tarmac sliding past. Rowan went quiet. She could feel him watching her. Could feel the weight of his gaze like a hand on her shoulder she didn't ask for. 5 years. 5 years of learning how to sleep alone. 5 years of throwing out his toothbrush, his shirts, his coffee mug that said something stupid he thought was funny. 5 years of people telling her it would get easier, that time healed, that she was young and resilient and eventually she'd be ready to try again. She hadn't tried again. She'd just survived. And now he was here, breathing, alive, sitting 2 inches away like death was something you could just opt out of. The plane lifted. Dorothy's stomach lurched with the ascent. She closed her eyes, pressed her temple against the cold window, and tried to ignore the fact that her body was still reacting to him. That heat. That recognition. It wasn't supposed to be possible. She'd buried it with him. Watched it lowered into the ground. Signed the paperwork that said it was over. But it wasn't over. It had just been waiting. "I didn't know you'd be here," Rowan said quietly. Dorothy opened her eyes. Stared at the clouds beginning to form outside the window. "Does that matter?" she asked. Silence. Then, yes. She laughed. Short, brittle, nothing like humor. "You've been dead for 5 years, Rowan. I don't think knowing changes anything. It changes everything." She turned then. Looked at him directly for the first time since he'd admitted the truth. He looked wrecked. Not physically. He looked healthy, solid, more filled out than she remembered. But his eyes were wrong. Shadowed. Like he hadn't slept well in a very long time. "Good. You let me bury you," Dorothy said softly. Rowan flinched. "I stood at a grave with your name on it and watched them lower a casket into the ground. I listened to people I didn't know tell me how sorry they were. I signed documents. I scattered ashes." Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. "So no, Rowan. It doesn't matter that you didn't know I'd be here. What matters is you chose not to be anywhere I could find you." His hands tightened in his lap. She watched his jaw work like he was trying to find the right words and failing. "I didn't have a choice," he said finally. "Everyone has a choice. Not when the alternative is worse." Dorothy leaned back, breaking eye contact. She felt suddenly exhausted. Like the last 5 years had just caught up with her all at once. "Then I hope it was worth it," she said. Rowan didn't respond. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around them, passengers shifted, pulled out phones, reclined seats. Dorothy pulled her headphones back in and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. But she stopped talking. And Rowan, alive, breathing, impossible, sat beside her in silence, carrying the weight of a grave that should have stayed closed. Dorothy kept her eyes closed for 20 minutes. She wasn't sleeping. She was counting breaths. Counting seconds. Counting the ways her life had just fractured into a before and after she didn't ask for. The music in her headphones was white noise. She couldn't have named the song if someone held a gun to her head. All she could focus on was the fact that Rowan hadn't moved. Hadn't shifted in his seat. Hadn't pulled out a phone or a book or done any of the normal things people did on flights. He was just sitting there. Still. Like he was waiting for something. She opened her eyes and glanced sideways without turning her head. He was staring straight ahead, hands still folded, posture rigid. But there was something different now. A tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He looked alert. Not nervous. Not uncomfortable. Aware. Dorothy frowned and pulled out one earbud. "What?" she asked. Rowan didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked toward the aisle, then back to the seat in front of him. "Nothing," he said. It wasn't nothing. She followed his line of sight. Rows of passengers. A man scrolling on his tablet. A woman asleep against the window. A teenager with headphones bigger than his head. Normal. Except. 3 rows up, across the aisle, a man in a gray jacket sat perfectly still. He wasn't reading. Wasn't watching a screen. Wasn't doing anything except existing with the kind of stillness that felt deliberate. Dorothy's pulse ticked up. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Rowan's jaw tightened. "No one." "You're a terrible liar." He exhaled through his nose. Slow. Controlled. "Someone I work with." "Work," Dorothy repeated flatly. "You mean the people who helped you fake your death?" Rowan didn't deny it. She turned fully in her seat now, ignoring the cramped space, the armrest digging into her ribs. "How many of them are on this plane?" "Dorothy." "How many, Rowan?" He met her eyes. Held them. 2. Her stomach dropped. "They're watching me." It wasn't a question. Rowan hesitated. Then nodded once. Dorothy sat back, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what that meant. She'd been on this plane for less than an hour and already there were people, his people, monitoring her like she was a threat. "Since when?" she asked. "Since you sat down." "Before you sat down," she corrected. Rowan didn't answer. Which was answer enough. They'd seen her first. Recognized her. Watched her board, find her seat, close her eyes. And then Rowan had sat beside her anyway. "Why?" Dorothy asked. Her voice was quiet now. Dangerously quiet. "Why are they watching me, or why did you sit here knowing they were?" "Both." Rowan turned toward her. For the first time since they'd spoken, he looked directly at her without flinching. And there was something in his expression she couldn't name. Something that looked almost like regret. "They're watching you because they know what you are to me," he said. "And I sat here because if I didn't, they would have." The heat in her chest flared, sharp and sudden. "What I was," Dorothy corrected. "No." His voice dropped lower. Rougher. "What you are." She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold the fact that whatever she thought had died 5 years ago was apparently still breathing. Still present. Still binding her to a man who'd chosen to disappear. "I don't want this," she said finally. "I know. I didn't ask for this." "I know." "Then why?" Her voice cracked. Just barely. She swallowed it down, forced it back into control. "Why didn't you just stay dead?" Rowan looked at her like the question hurt. "Because I was never supposed to see you again," he said quietly. "And the bond doesn't care what I was supposed to do." Dorothy turned back toward the window. Outside, the sky was flat and endless. No landmarks. No reference points. Just altitude and isolation. She pulled her headphones back in and closed her eyes. But this time, she didn't count breaths. She counted exits. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Dorothy ordered water. Rowan asked for nothing. She didn't look at him when the attendant moved on. Didn't acknowledge the way his presence pressed against her awareness like a bruise she kept forgetting was there until she moved wrong. The water sat untouched on her tray table. She stared at it. Condensation beading on the plastic cup. A small thing. Normal. The kind of detail that should have anchored her to reality. Instead, all she could think about was the man 3 rows up who hadn't moved in 40 minutes. And the bond Rowan said still existed. She didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. Because if it was real, if it had survived 5 years, a funeral, scattered ashes that weren't his, then everything she'd rebuilt was a lie. Every moment she'd convinced herself she was fine, functional, over it was just her body going through motions while something deeper stayed tethered to a ghost. Except he wasn't a ghost. He was solid. Warm. Close enough that she could hear him breathing. The plane hit turbulence. Not bad. Just enough to rattle the cabin. A few passengers gasped. Someone's bag shifted in the overhead bin. Dorothy's hand shot out instinctively, gripping the armrest. Rowan's hand landed over hers. She froze. His palm was warm. Calloused in places it hadn't been before. The touch wasn't gentle, it was grounding. Deliberate. Like he'd reached for her without thinking and now didn't know how to let go. The turbulence evened out. Rowan pulled his hand back slowly. Dorothy's skin burned where he'd touched her. Not metaphorically. Literally. Like heat trapped under the surface, spreading up her wrist, into her forearm. She turned her hand over, staring at her palm. Nothing. No mark. No redness. Just the lingering sense that something had woken up and she didn't know how to put it back to sleep. "Don't," she said quietly. Rowan's voice came low. "Careful. I wasn't trying to. I don't care what you were trying to do." She turned toward him, and this time she didn't hide the anger. "Don't touch me. Don't sit here like we're something we're not. Don't act like 5 years doesn't matter just because you can feel some pull you decided was more important than the truth." Rowan's expression didn't change. But something shifted behind his eyes. Something that looked like pain. "It's not a pull," he said quietly. "It's recognition. I don't recognize you." "Yes, you do." And God help her, he was right. She did recognize him. In the way her body leaned toward him even when her mind screamed to pull away. In the way her pulse steadied when he was close and spiked when he wasn't. In the way every rational thought she had dissolved the second his hand touched hers. It terrified her. "I buried you," Dorothy whispered. "I let you go. You didn't have a choice. And now I do?" Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then shook his head. "No," he said. "Neither of us do." The honesty of it hit harder than comfort would have. Dorothy turned back to the window. Her reflection stared back, exhausted, furious, unraveling in real time. Behind her, she could feel Rowan's gaze. Not invasive. Just present. The way gravity was present. Unavoidable. She hated it. Hated that her body knew him. Hated that some part of her she couldn't control had been waiting for this. Hated that he was right. This wasn't a choice. It was something older. Deeper. And it didn't care what she wanted. The cabin lights dimmed for the in-flight movie. Around them, passengers settled into sleep or screens. Dorothy pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, and made herself as small as the seat would allow. Rowan stayed still beside her. Not watching. Not speaking. Just there. Like he'd always been there. Like he'd never left. And somewhere 3 rows ahead, the man in the gray jacket finally moved, pulling out his phone, typing something short, and setting it back down. Dorothy saw it in the reflection of the window. She didn't ask what the message said. She already knew. She knows. An hour passed in silence. Dorothy didn't sleep. Didn't try to. She just sat there, knees tucked against her chest, watching her reflection blur and refocus in the window. The cabin was dark now except for scattered reading lights and the glow of screens. Most passengers had settled into the rhythm of the flight, that strange suspension between departure and arrival where time felt negotiable. Dorothy felt none of it. She felt the heat still lingering on her palm where Rowan had touched her. Felt the weight of his presence beside her, constant and undeniable. Felt the pull in her chest that hadn't existed an hour ago, or maybe had always existed and she'd just learned to ignore it. "You should try to sleep," Rowan said quietly. His first words in 63 minutes. She'd counted. "I'm fine," Dorothy said without looking at him. "You're exhausted." "And whose fault is that?" Silence. She regretted the sharpness immediately, but didn't take it back. She had a right to her anger. A right to every barbed word she wanted to throw at him. Rowan shifted in his seat. She heard the fabric of his shirt pull taut, heard the quiet exhale that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "I know you have questions," he said. Dorothy laughed. Dry, humorless. "Questions. Right." She turned toward him, letting her knees drop. "Let's start with the easy one. What are you?" Rowan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You said you didn't die. You said you were turned." "Turned into what, Rowan?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, a shifter. The word hung between them. Dorothy stared at him, waiting for the punchline. The explanation that made it make sense. None came. A shifter, she repeated slowly. Yes. As in, what werewolf? Shapeshifter. Wolf, yes. She waited for him to smile. To admit he was deflecting, buying time, saying anything to avoid the real answer. He didn't. He just looked at her with those same gray eyes, older now, shadowed, and waited for her to process what he'd just said. Dorothy sat back. Her mind went blank. Then flooded. Then blank again. That's not real, she said. It is. No. It's, people don't just turn into animals. That's folklore. Fiction. It's not. It's real, Rowan said quietly. And it's what I am now. Dorothy pressed her hands against her temples. The cabin felt smaller suddenly. Too warm. Too confined. When? She asked. 5 years ago. A month before they told you I died. And you couldn't tell me. It wasn't a question. Rowan shook his head. I wasn't allowed to. By who? The pack. The people who turned me. The people on this plane. Some of them. Dorothy's hands dropped to her lap. She stared at them, pale, steady, ordinary. Human. Why? She asked. Her voice was barely audible now. Why you? Rowan exhaled slowly. I was in the wrong place. Saw something I wasn't supposed to see. They had 2 choices, kill me or turn me. So they turned you and told me you were dead. To protect you. Dorothy's head snapped up. Don't. Dorothy. Don't you dare tell me this was for my protection. Her voice was low, shaking with controlled fury. You let me grieve. You let me think you were gone. You let me rebuild my entire life around the fact that you weren't in it anymore. I didn't have a choice. You keep saying that like it absolves you. It doesn't, Rowan said quietly. But it's still true. Dorothy looked away. Her hands were trembling now. She tucked them under her arms to hide it. Did you ever think about coming back? She asked. Every day. But you didn't. No. Why? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. Raw. Because loving you meant letting you go. Dorothy closed her eyes. She wanted to scream. Wanted to tell him that love didn't work like that it didn't get to be noble and selfish at the same time. That choosing for someone else without asking them wasn't protection, it was control. But she didn't. She just sat there, feeling the bond pull tighter with every second, hating that her body didn't care about his reasons. It only cared that he was here. Alive. Real. And she didn't know what to do with that. Dorothy didn't speak for the next 30 minutes. She sat with her arms crossed, staring at the seat back in front of her, trying to reconcile the impossible with the undeniable. Shifters. Packs. Forced transformations. It sounded like something out of a paperback thriller she would have skimmed in an airport and never finished. Except Rowan wasn't lying. She could feel it in the way he'd said it, steady, factual, like he was reporting the weather. No defensiveness. No embellishment. Just truth. And the truth was worse than any lie she could have imagined. The funeral, she said suddenly. Rowan turned toward her. There was a casket, Dorothy continued. Her voice was flat. Clinical. I watched them lower it into the ground. There was a death certificate. Ashes. I know. Whose were they? Rowan hesitated. Rowan. Whose ashes did I scatter? No one's, he said quietly. They were fabricated. Part of the cover. Dorothy felt something crack inside her chest. Not the bond. Something smaller. More fragile. The last piece of closure she'd been clinging to. So it was all fake, she said. The accident report. The closed casket. The condolences from people I didn't know. Yes. The pack arranged all of it. With human authorities, yes. They have people in place. Records can be altered. Deaths can be staged. Dorothy laughed. Sharp and bitter. That's insane. That's survival, Rowan said. The shifter world exists because it stays hidden. Secrecy isn't optional. It's law. And I was collateral damage. He flinched. You were protected. Protected. Dorothy turned toward him fully now, anger burning through the numbness. You keep using that word like it means something. Like erasing me from your life was some kind of gift. It kept you safe. From what? From them. Rowan's voice dropped. From the pack. From the laws that govern what happens when a human learns what we are. And what happens? Rowan's gaze held hers. Unflinching. They're turned. Or they're killed. There is no third option. The words landed like a physical blow. Dorothy sat back, the air leaving her lungs in a slow, unsteady exhale. So if you'd stayed, she said quietly, if you'd told me the truth. You would have been forced to choose. And neither choice would have let you keep your life. Silence. The hum of the plane filled the space between them. Somewhere behind them, a baby started crying. A flight attendant moved down the aisle with a trash bag. Normal sounds. Normal moments. Nothing about this was normal. I would have chosen you, Dorothy said. Rowan's expression fractured. Just for a second. Then he pulled it back together, but not before she saw the grief there. I know, he said. That's why I left. Dorothy felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. You didn't leave, she said. You died. You made sure I couldn't look for you. Couldn't question it. Couldn't fight for you. Because if you had, they would have found you. And I couldn't. His voice broke. He stopped. Started again. I couldn't let that happen. So you made the choice for me? Yes. And now? Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since he'd sat down, she saw something other than control in his eyes. She saw fear. Now, he said quietly, they know you're here. They know the bond didn't break. And they're going to have questions I don't have answers to. Dorothy's pulse spiked. The men watching me. They're not just watching. They're waiting. For what? To see what you do. What I do. Whether this, he gestured vaguely between them, is going to be a problem. Dorothy's throat tightened. And if it is? Rowan didn't answer. He didn't have to. She could see it in the tension in his shoulders. In the way his hands had curled into fists in his lap. The pack didn't forgive loose ends. And she had just become one. When we land, Dorothy said slowly, what happens? I don't know, Rowan admitted. But they'll be waiting. For me. For both of us. Dorothy closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. 5 years. 5 years of believing he was gone. 5 years of moving forward. And in less than 2 hours, it had all unraveled. She wasn't grieving anymore. She was trapped. And the man beside her, the man she'd loved, mourned and buried, was the reason why. The cabin lights flickered as the plane hit another patch of turbulence. Dorothy's stomach lurched, but she didn't reach for the armrest this time. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, nails digging into her palms. Control. She needed control. Because everything else, the bond, the pack, the impossible fact that Rowan was alive, was spiraling beyond her grasp. I need to understand something, she said. Rowan turned toward her, waiting. This bond, Dorothy continued. You said it didn't break. That it's still active. What does that mean for me? Rowan's jaw tightened. It means your body recognizes me as your mate. Whether you want it to or not. And that's not my choice. No. So I'm bound to you. Forever. Because of something that happened before you decided to disappear. It's more complicated than that. Then simplify it. Rowan exhaled slowly. The bond formed when we were together. Before I was turned. It should have broken when they declared me dead. Bonds don't usually survive that kind of severance. But ours didn't. Why? I don't know. He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. Maybe because it was real. Maybe because you never really let go. Or maybe, he stopped. Maybe what? Maybe because I never stopped being yours. Dorothy's breath caught. She hated how those words landed. Hated that they made the heat in her chest flare brighter, made the pull toward him sharpen into something almost painful. I don't want this, she said. I know. I didn't ask to be tied to someone who chose to leave me. I know. Then why does it feel like I don't get a say? Rowan looked away. His hands unclenched, then clenched again. Because you don't, he said quietly. Neither of us do. The bond doesn't care about choices. It just is. Dorothy stared at him. At the profile of a man she used to know. Used to love. Used to plan a future with. Now he was a stranger wearing a familiar face. What do you want from me? She asked. Rowan turned back to her, and for the first time since he'd sat down, she saw something unguarded in his eyes. Nothing, he said. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to understand. He stopped. Swallowed. I just need you to survive this. Survive what? Landing. What comes after? Dorothy's pulse quickened. You said the pack would have questions. They will. And if I don't have the right answers? Rowan's silence was answer enough. She turned away, staring at the dark window. Her reflection looked small. Tired. Trapped at 30,000 feet with nowhere to run and no way to undo the last 2 hours. I can't become what you are, she said quietly. I won't let them force you. Can you stop them? Rowan hesitated. I can try. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Dorothy closed her eyes. The exhaustion was catching up now, physical, emotional, existential. She felt like she'd lived an entire lifetime in the span of a flight. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Sit here. Next to you. Feeling this, she pressed a hand to her chest. And knowing it doesn't mean what it used to. Rowan's voice was soft. Almost broken. It means the same thing it always did. No. Dorothy opened her eyes. It doesn't. Because you're not the man I loved. You're something else now. And I'm not the woman who would have followed you anywhere. I know. Do you? She turned toward him, and the anger was back. Quiet but present. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you think this bond gives you some kind of claim. Like it erases 5 years of grief and lies and loss. I don't think that. Then what do you think? Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the weight he was carrying. The guilt. The regret. The fear. I think, he said slowly, that I made a choice I can't take back. And I think you deserved better than the one I made. Dorothy felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness. But acknowledgement. It wasn't enough. But it was something. She turned back to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn creeping in at the edges, turning black to deep blue. They'd be landing soon. And whatever happened next, whatever the pack decided, whatever the bond demanded, she'd face it the same way she'd faced the last 5 years. Alone. Even if Rowan was sitting right beside her. When we land, Dorothy said quietly, I want you to stay away from me. Rowan went still. Dorothy. I mean it. She didn't look at him. Whatever this is, whatever you think we are, I need space. I need to think. And I can't do that with you near me. The bond won't make that easy. I don't care. Silence. Then quietly, okay. Dorothy nodded. She didn't believe him. But she needed the lie. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. Dorothy straightened in her seat. Around her, passengers stirred, closing laptops, folding blankets, returning seats to their upright positions. The normal rituals of arrival. She felt none of the relief that usually came with descent. Just a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with altitude. Rowan hadn't spoken since she'd asked him to stay away. He sat rigid beside her, hands gripping the armrests like he was bracing for impact. His jaw was set, eyes fixed straight ahead. But she could feel the tension radiating off him. Could sense something building beneath the surface, controlled but barely. The plane banked left, beginning its final approach. Dorothy looked out the window. The city sprawled below, lights flickering in the pre-dawn gray. Highways. Buildings. The ordinary geometry of a place that had no idea what was about to walk off this plane. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from her supervisor. Car service arranged. Driver will meet you at baggage claim. Hotel info attached. Simple. Professional. A life continuing as planned. Except nothing was going according to plan anymore. Dorothy pocketed the phone without responding. The wheels touched down. The cabin jolted. Passengers applauded, something she'd never understood. Relief at not dying, maybe. Gratitude for the ordinary miracle of controlled flight. Dorothy felt nothing. The plane taxied toward the gate, engines winding down, reality pressing in with every second. She unbuckled her seatbelt. Pulled her bag from under the seat. Beside her, Rowan didn't move. You should go first, he said quietly. Dorothy turned toward him. Why? Because they're waiting for me. Not you. If you leave now, before they see us together. They already saw us together. Then at least don't let them see us leave together. The plane stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood, reaching for overhead bins, crowding the aisle in the universal rush to exit faster than physics allowed. Dorothy stayed seated. What happens when you get off this plane? She asked. Rowan's throat worked. I report to the Alpha. And tell him what? That I encountered my mate. That the bond didn't break. That, he stopped. That I'm a problem. That you're protected, Rowan corrected. By me. By the bond. By laws older than the pack. Dorothy stared at him. And if that's not enough? Rowan finally looked at her. Really looked at her. Then I'll make it enough. The aisle was clearing now. Passengers filing toward the exit. The flight attendants stood at their positions, smiling, thanking people for flying. Dorothy stood. Rowan caught her wrist. Not hard. Not controlling. Just contact. A touch that sent heat spiraling up her arm, into her chest, behind her ribs. Wait, he said. For what? Just. His grip loosened but didn't release. 10 seconds. Let them get off first. Dorothy understood. The watchers. The pack members 3 rose up. She glanced toward the front of the plane. Saw the man in the gray jacket moving toward the exit. Saw another figure she hadn't noticed before. A woman in dark jeans and a leather jacket, following close behind. Neither looked back. But Dorothy knew they were aware. Knew they'd clocked every moment of the flight. Every word exchanged. Every second Rowan's hand had touched hers. They disappeared through the exit. Rowan released her wrist. Now, he said. Dorothy pulled her bag over her shoulder and stepped into the aisle. Rowan stayed seated. She walked toward the exit without looking back. The flight attendant smiled at her. Have a wonderful day. Dorothy nodded and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air was stale and fluorescent bright. She moved with the flow of passengers, following signs toward baggage claim. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Different number. Unknown sender. She stopped walking. Stepped aside to let others pass. Opened the message. Terminal B. Gate 27. 5 minutes. No signature. No context. Dorothy's pulse spiked. She turned, looking back toward the gate she'd just left. Rowan was coming through now. Moving slowly. Scanning the terminal. He saw her. Their eyes met across the distance. And then 2 figures appeared on either side of him. The man in gray. The woman in leather. Not touching him. Not restraining him. Just there. A presence that shifted from surveillance to escort in the span of a heartbeat. Rowan's expression didn't change. But Dorothy saw the resignation in the set of his shoulders. He mouthed something, 2 words. I'm sorry. Then he turned and walked away, flanked by the pack, disappearing into the crowd. Dorothy stood frozen. Her phone buzzed a third time. Same number. 4 minutes. She looked down at the text. Then back at the space where Rowan had been. She had a choice. Follow the corporate plan. Get in the car service. Check into the hotel. Pretend the last 2 hours hadn't happened. Or walk toward gate 27 and find out what the pack wanted from her. Dorothy took a breath. Then she started walking. Not toward baggage claim. Toward Terminal B. Gate 27 was empty. No passengers. No attendants. Just rows of empty chairs facing a darkened window that looked out onto the tarmac. Dorothy stopped at the entrance, scanning the space. A man stood near the window. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair threaded with gray. He wore a suit that looked expensive without being flashy. The kind of thing you wore when you didn't need to prove anything. He didn't turn when she approached. Dorothy Daniel, he said. Not a question. Who are you? Marcus Hale. He turned then, and his eyes caught the fluorescent light. Gray, like Rowan's. But colder. Sharper. Alpha of the Northern Range Pack. Dorothy's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. You texted me. I did. Why? Marcus gestured toward the empty chairs. Sit. I'd rather stand. A faint smile crossed his face. I imagine you would. But sit anyway. It wasn't a request. Dorothy sat. Marcus took the chair across from her, leaning back with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to fight for authority. You've had an interesting flight, he said. That's one word for it. Rowan didn't know you'd be there. So he said. Marcus studied her. Not threatening. Just assessing. Like she was a problem he was trying to calculate the scope of. The bond, he said. It's active. Dorothy didn't answer. I can see it in you, Marcus continued. The way you're sitting. The tension. Your body's fighting something it can't control. What do you want? Dorothy asked flatly. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I want to know what you plan to do. About what? About Rowan. About what you learned on that plane. About the fact that you now carry knowledge that makes you dangerous. Dorothy's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice steady. Dangerous to who? To my pack. To the secrecy we've maintained for generations. To the structure that keeps us safe. I'm not a threat. You're human, Marcus said. And you know what we are. That makes you a threat by definition. Dorothy met his gaze. Held it. Then why am I still breathing? Marcus's expression didn't change. Because Rowan would destroy himself trying to protect you. And I need him functional. The honesty was almost worse than a threat would have been. So what? Dorothy said. You let me go as long as I stay quiet? No. Marcus straightened. I give you the same choice we give every human who learns what we are. Dorothy's throat tightened. Turn or die. Those are the options. Rowan said he'd protect me. Rowan will try, Marcus corrected. But protection has limits. Even for a mate bond. Dorothy looked away. Through the window, she could see planes taxiing. People boarding. Lives continuing in the ordinary rhythm she'd lived in 2 hours ago. It felt impossibly distant now. How long do I have? She asked quietly. To decide. Marcus considered. 48 hours. After that, the choice becomes mine. Dorothy turned back to him. And what would you choose? Marcus stood, smoothing his suit jacket. I'd choose survival, he said. The pack's survival. Which means you'd be turned, whether you consented or not. That's not a choice. No, Marcus agreed. But it's honest. He walked toward the exit, then paused. Rowan made a mistake 5 years ago, he said without turning. He thought keeping you human would keep you safe. But all it did was delay the inevitable. What's inevitable? Marcus looked back at her. You were always going to be ours, Dorothy. The bond saw to that. The only question now is whether you walk into it willingly or fight every step of the way. He left. Dorothy sat alone in the empty gate, hands trembling in her lap. Her phone buzzed. The corporate car service. Waiting at baggage claim. She stared at the text. 48 hours. 2 days to decide if she wanted to keep her humanity or surrender it to a world she didn't ask to be part of. 2 days to choose between the life she'd rebuilt and the bond that refused to let her go. Dorothy stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced them to carry her toward the exit. She didn't know what she was going to do. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let them decide for her. Not Rowan. Not Marcus. Not the bond. If she was going to lose herself, it would be on her terms. And she had 48 hours to figure out what those terms were. If this story made your chest tighten, you're not alone. Subscribe for more modern shifter stories, second chance bonds, and truths that refuse to stay buried.